Greetings everyone. Today on the bench I have a pair of speakers to review. The Aiyima S4000 powered speakers. These were provided to me without charge for me to review, but as always I will give my honest opinion of them. I want to do the video a little bit differently than normal. First I'll do the overview and then I'll talk about how I think they sound. And in the second part of the video I'll remove the plate amplifier, take a look inside, also see if I can hook it up to the audio analyzer and get some graphs. So what we have here is a fairly compact desktop or bookshelf speaker with a long throw 4-inch, which is about 10 centimeter woofer. Up top here we have a horn loaded tweeter. Looks to have about a 1-inch or 25 millimeter dome type tweeter. This does not come with a grill, so it does have some protection for the tweeter. And I do like the styling. And there's kind of a, you can see a texture there. Going around the side here, we have a vinyl veneer, kind of a blonde color. I'm not sure what species of woods this represents, but maybe it's like a maple or something. And it's a fairly good quality covering. I see that Aiyima went with more of a traditional shape. Their other speaker I reviewed, well, a couple other ones, had a kind of slanted baffle and angular design to them, and this is more of a traditional rectangle shape. And looking at my notes here, the speaker is about 11 inches tall, 28 centimeters, 5 3/4 wide, which is about 14.5 centimeters, 7 1/4 deep, and that's about 18.5 centimeters. So it's not a tiny speaker, but it's pretty small, at least compared to some of the other ones I've looked at in the past here. Looking around back here, we have an oval-shaped port. There's a mild flaring to it. It goes in and bends down. They do that because of the room. There's not a lot of room, and to get the port length, they have to angle that down. Looking at the plate amp on back, this doesn't come with a wall wart. The AC mains goes right in here with the master power switch. Up here we have power indicators. I do miss the S700 model that had the multicolored LED on the front. You could see what mode you're in, but you'd have to look at back, around back to see what mode you're in. It's kind of annoying, but it is what it is. We have a rotary encoder volume control with push button action to change the modes and long hold to turn it off. And what I think is very important on these powered speakers is a set of bass and treble controls, so you can tailor the sound somewhat. If you want to place these closer to a wall, you want to turn the bass down, and of course you can tailor the treble as well, which I thought that I needed to do, and I'll talk about that later. So that's very nice to see. Of course, it does have Bluetooth. It has a subwoofer out, RCA inputs, and balanced inputs with XLR. Let's see here, also accept a TRS type connector. My main gripe is, why do they really need balanced connectors on consumer audio gear? It's not like you're running a several meter cable across a stage or anything. Most of the interconnects are usually a meter or less. I would rather see a couple more sets of RCA, so it's just less equipment you need. With only one set of RCAs, I'll have to go into a preamp or some sort of switch box. And a powered speaker, you don't have to have the amplifier. And having all the interconnects, that's just another thing I wouldn't need. So yeah, maybe it's just me, but I don't see much of a point in balance connectors on consumer audio. And this connector here is just the output for the other speaker. Accessories that come in the box. Of course, you get the little manual here. And it's pretty light on specs. Let's see where the specs are here. Yeah, they don't really say too much. You get an RF type remote control, of course the power cable, the interconnect cable, so you can set the speakers up to about, let's say, 8 or 9 feet apart, and that would be about 2.5 meters or so. They do give you RCA to 3.5 millimeter input jack there to connect headphone operated devices. So that's pretty much what comes in the package. Oh, I also should mention that on the bottom here they come with these nice spongy rubbery feet that come pre-applied, so you don't have to worry about sticking them on. Not a big deal, but something nonetheless. For a listening test, I spread them apart and set them at the edge of the bench. Gave them a listening for a few hours, actually a couple days worth of listening sessions, just to see what they sound like. First thing I listen for is anything that stands out that's annoying, and I didn't hear that with these speakers. Another thing, especially with these smaller speakers, you know, we got these 4-inch drivers, is a lot of speakers, they start to roll off the bass at 80 or 90 hertz. They just don't handle bass very well. Well, these did much better. They held on to the bass down to 55 to 60 hertz. Pretty impressive for the size. In fact, they work really well with classic rock and pop music that I often listen to. Where they do struggle, though, is at lower frequencies. Although you do get in-room extension down into the mid-40-ish range, it's not very strong or powerful. So if you're playing electronic or rap or hip-hop or stuff, any music with lower notes, speakers do struggle. The bass is just not as present. And in some cases I can even hear port turbulence. So these speakers do need a subwoofer if you're going to play music that gets in the lower range. Didn't notice any issues with mid-range. I thought the treble was a little bright for me, and that's where I like having those tone controls in the back. So I set the treble to -2, and that was about perfect for me. I seem to be more sensitive to treble. Some people seem to like it. They think it adds detail, but you know, mainly just be flat or even lay it back somewhat. Another thing I liked about these speakers is I can turn them up and they don't sound compressed or distorted. Now these small speakers, they're not going to blow the roof off, but for a small to medium sized room I do think they fill the room just fine. A normal listening level to me is around 85 decibels average. You know, if I like a song or something, I might turn it up to 88. And pretty loud is going to be around 92, and that's measuring about 2 meters back. And the speaker sounded pretty good at those levels. So you can crank these up and retain good sound. One thing I've noticed with a lot of small speakers, if you crank them up, the bass gets compressed because you're forcing them to play with too much input power, and that just distorts the sound. Which I think we're going to find out later, they are using DSP to help flatten things out. As far as imaging goes with these speakers, I'd say they're pretty average. They're not terrible, but they're not great either. One early complaint I've heard about these speakers is a high level of hiss, background hiss. And at least with the pair of speakers I got, I'm not hearing a lot of hiss at all. If I put my ear up to the tweeter, yeah, I can hear a faint background hiss, but moving back to about this position here, you know, I don't really hear anything. In fact, I can hear the computer fan more, which is about 2 meters away, and itself is not terribly loud. So yeah, I'm not sure what those hiss complaints are about, but it's just not evident in my pair. Okay, I removed the amplifier assembly here. So we have a 24 volt switch mode supply. I don't see double insulation on the main side, but we do have a common mode choke, capacitor, MOV, that little black square thing I think is a fuse. I think that transistor-ish looking thing on the heatsink is the switcher transistor. On the secondary side, that's a diode likely, and some filtering over there as well. This board here is just the control and LEDs. This is the main amplifier board. I think they said these are TPA 3118 amplifiers. But what's interesting, you're going to have 2 output chokes per speaker. So there's 2 here, or for one side, and 2 for the other speaker. And the tweeter appears to have its own amplifier, because one criticism of the S700 review I did is they were powering both the tweeter and woofer off the same amplifier, just filtering the tweeter with a capacitor, so they were sending the full range signal to the woofer driver. But in this case, it appears at least that the tweeter and woofer signals are separated, and that's good, because you can have some issues with the woofer playing the same frequencies the tweeter is, especially vertically. You can get some weird tonal changes when you move up and down vertically in the listening field. But I didn't notice anything wild with these speakers, so that's probably the reason they are using separate amps there. We'll check that out. Inside the speaker, you can see the woofer with a reasonably sized magnet. It's branded Aiyima with the speaker's model number, so that is a pretty specific driver, I would say. I measured it to be a 4 ohm driver. And there's the port. Like I say, it angles down inside for room. And there's no bracing, but these speakers being so small, you don't really need anything there. They do seem to be pretty solid speakers. Cabinet, I should say. There is no insulating, or I should say, sound absorbent batting or anything in use. So yeah, that is a look inside the speaker. So now I want to see if I can analyze the amplifier board. Okay, I have the amp module connected to the analyzer. So I'm going to the load here, set for 4 ohms. The woofer measures 4. Now the tweeter measures 8, so it's going off to a resistor. Actually, the DCR is 5.4 ohms. You might call that 6, maybe 7 ohms. I don't know exactly what that tweeter is. And it's going separately in the other channel to the analyzer, because I gotta measure them separately. And because it's bridged outputs, I have to measure differentially. So we got everything set up. I'm just going to measure one channel here. It takes a lot to hook all this stuff up. Okay, to start out, we'll take a measurement at 1 kilohertz, 1 watt into 4 ohms. 4 ohms because that's the rating of the woofer driver. Only measuring the woofer channel here. And the gain of the amplifier is 26 dB. For all the tests, I have the volume control wide open, and I have the bass and treble controls set flat. And you can see the distortion here is not too bad really, 0.085. So yeah, it's pretty decent. You can see the largest harmonic is a second order, and it's down about -65 or so. Second order's down around -80. And I'm not sure if these are harmonics or something to do with switch mode noise, but they are pretty low, so not too concerned there. And what's pretty interesting is I'm not seeing any sort of power supply noise getting in. Despite having an onboard switch mode, I think you'd see some line frequency noise getting in, but there's just noise down here. I'm not really seeing anything. Frequency response. The blue line is the bass channel and the red line is the tweeter. So what you're seeing is some DSP action applied here. I set 1 kilohertz as my 0 dB reference. You can see they're notching out at 200 hertz. There must be a box resonance or something they're trying to get rid of. And then we get a little boost here in the bass frequency. Not much, I mean almost a dB in the 50-60 hertz range. And we're back to 0 at 40. And they're rolling it off pretty quick below that point. 3 dB down at 30. They want to keep, power low in the low frequencies to that small woofer. So they're rolling it off pretty quick. And this is the electrical measurement, that it's not the actual acoustic output. The output's going to be more flat. The idea is to make it more flat, and it's probably going to be rolling off like this acoustically. It's going to roll off and probably be 3 dB down around 55 or 50 or so, and roll off quickly from there, being a small driver. So what's going on with the tweeter over here? Well, being a horn-loaded tweeter, it's going to be very efficient. Plus the impedance is higher, so less signal is going into it. So acoustically, this is up here, probably more flat. But being so efficient, you have to put a really low signal into it. And if we say 3 dB down is our crossover point for the woofer, we're at about 2500. They're crossing over, it looks like. Seems a bit low for the small speaker. I think they'd be at least 3000. But this is just what I'm seeing here. So acoustically, this line would be up here and probably more flat. And they're giving more signal as the frequency gets higher. Probably the tweeter's rolling off is what's happening. So yeah, that's what's going on with the frequency response. Okay, this is the woofer channel power versus distortion graph. So at low signal levels, we're staying well below the 0.1 line. And we cross the 0.1 line here, probably around 2.1 kilohertz. And all the way from there to 40 watts, it has a general climb to around 0.3% distortion. So, it's not bad. Would like to see it stay below 0.1 though. But something interesting here, no matter how I set the maximum level on the Quantasylum, it will not go over 40 watts. And that's because they have a built-in anti-clipping circuit, probably part of the DSP. It won't let the amplifier go over 40 watts. I would think they would let it go a little higher, so go into clipping, but they probably don't. They probably want to limit power to that small woofer. I mean, the woofer itself is probably going to compress and distort at 40 watts, but at least the amplifier will never go into clipping at that power level. I think that's enough. I don't want this to go on too long. But overall, I'm pretty impressed with the speakers. Sound pretty good. Decent bass for the size. They make a great computer system speaker, or if you want a budget speaker for a small system that doesn't take up a lot of room. Now if you want lower bass, you want to add a subwoofer with these. If these turn out to be good sellers, they ought to produce a matched subwoofer that would work with these. I think that'd be pretty nice. But there you have it, the Aiyima S4000 bookshelf speakers. That'll do it for this one. Thanks for watching.